You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
I got Bantha.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file.
That doesn't sound too hard.
Boom! This is Making Tracks.
This is the way.
Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
I know these people. They are brutal. Does this look Jedi to you?
That's not how the Force works.
They'll never see it coming.
Count me in.
Hello there, and welcome to Making Tracks Reaction Chat for Season 2 of Andor, a Star Wars story. Brought to you by those fine folk over at fanthatracks.com. My name's Mark, one of your co-hosts, and obviously joining me this week will be Mr. Mark Newbold. So, this is our reaction, our thoughts and mutterings to episodes 16, 17 and 18 of Andor. This is kind of your spoiler warning as well. So if you haven't watched the episodes yet, then why are you listening to me? Go and watch the episodes. So we are a year after the escape of Cassian and Bix from Mina Rao. We've left behind the death of Brasso in the rearview mirror of a TIE fighter. We're now back on Coruscant with Bix and Cassian holed up in one of Luthen Rail's safe houses. We've got some major character developments this episode and a lot to chomp through. Mark, have you ever been to Ghorman?
Have I ever been to Ghorman? Look at my magnificent pajamas. Not Ghorman Twill, it's more Primani than Ghorman Twill, but hey ho, such is life. Yeah, I'm looking forward to digging into these 3 episodes because the first 3, the mood changes, the tone changes. It changes again in this one. You know, we have the drama of ending with the death of Brasso on Mina Rao, which was kind of heartbreaking. Obviously, his best friend, and something that I very much equated to Luke and Biggs, that we as long-term fans know there was that relationship between Luke and Biggs. It's been fleshed out in sort of other stuff. But if you just saw A New Hope and you didn't know there was a connection between the two, you wouldn't know. Whereas Cassian and Brasso, you know that they were big-time friends.
Like, you know, Brasso was covering from him from episode 1 of season 1 all the way through.
Absolutely.
So,
and that connection to Marva as well.
Exactly. Brasso's the one who delivers like Marva's last words to Cassian. So, yeah, you can't get much closer than from those two, really.
No.
So, yeah, I think I'm right in thinking that this is the longest block that we're going to have. Just shy of 3 hours worth of Star Wars. That's a hell of a lot of content in anybody's reckoning. But there's definitely a tonal shift in this one. This one, me and you have even said, you know, you have the first 2 episodes of a block that kind of sets a scene, heightens attention, and then you have that release. And yes, there was kind of release in the third part of, well, really the third part of this arc.
Yeah.
But if this was so much more character and so much more politicking and a lot more stuff that you really kind of had to sit and watch. I mean, literally, I've only had the chance to watch this once, just purely from the visuals again. I mean, why would you want to look at your phone and check Facebook? Because this series is stunning.
It's lavish. It's designed up the wazoo. Everywhere you look is something you know has been crafted or carefully chosen. Obviously, we're talking about the first episode of this block, Ever Been to Ghorman, and there's moments in there where, you know, you're on Coruscant and you know that they've gone back to the Barbican in London and shot walking scenes there and then interspersed all the other stuff around it. That's one thing. It's kind of in your head that you've been there. But when you look at the craft and the way that they've blended this into the bigger picture, it's insane. And knowing that they don't really do stagecraft on Andor, it's massive sets. The work that's gone into it, all the costumes look so lavish. Unless something's come through your window with a brick tied to it, there's no reason to distract yourself from looking at that screen, because everywhere you look, it's either ILM smashing it, it's the designers smashing it, it's the costumers, it's the performances that are just so... Those actors have got each of those characters so in the pocket. You're kind of alluding to some bit like us, another boring 3 episodes of Andor. I'm sorry, if you find this boring, you're watching it wrong. There's so much going on. And I'll tell you the best analogy before I stop talking, because I could talk about this all day. The best analogy I can think of is if you watched Hawkeye, and there's loads of action in Hawkeye. It's a great series. But the best scene was when Kate and Yelena sat down at that table and they had that conversation, and there was no action particularly, and it was just 2 talking heads, and it was thrilling to watch. It was just brilliant. This is on that level. And so I'm absolutely feasting on this show. I think it's magic. I love it.
Considering the last thing we had was Skeleton Crew, there's space in Star Wars to tell these stories in different ways and therefore kind of appeal to different audiences. And that's fine. There are some fans that will take any Star Wars, and then there are other people who are kind of like, that's not really for me, I'm not really into animation, or I'm not into that, not quite sold on Kids from Skeleton Crew or whatever, or Acolyte. That's fine. I guess that's just how it is. You have to also allow those people to say that. But, this for me anyway, so far, amazing to think that we're 2 weeks in. So the second recorded reaction chat, but we're now halfway through this series.
I know. It's crazy.
This, like I said, this is more of a thriller. This episode was there's more spycraft.
Yeah.
It felt more like a Le Carré kind of novel. Although straight off the bat, really, again, it's not necessarily a direct nod to James Bond, but there's that very Bondian moment with Cyril when he's on Ghorman and he puts a little tripwire across his door to use as a sign to see if somebody's broken in. Dr. No, 1962, Sean plucks one of the very few hairs that he has left on his head, and he licks his thumb and then he kind of pastes it across his wardrobe doors in the hotel. For me, that was like, this is great. Reason why this episode was so engaging is because there was all these contrasts between relationships and between people's experiences, as well as the fact that people think they're working towards one goal when actually there's an ulterior motive wrapped inside an ulterior motive. So it's really complex. So it takes a long time to sit down and kind of unwrap it all.
You talk about complexity. We've got Bix, who we knew from the first chapter of 3 was having nightmares about Dr. Gors. She's still having nightmares about Dr. Gors. Cassian's now with her, so that calms her down to a degree. But that is still an ongoing thing, just as they said it would be. We finally get to see Ghorman, though. You see Ghorman, it's beautiful. They've built this incredible set, this beautiful courtyard. We're meeting Cyril. We're seeing Cyril in his element now. He's got a bit of control. He's a command character to a degree in this, the bureau that he works in. He's talking to his mom. So there's that lovely payoff from what Dedra said. I will allow you to speak to him twice a month, and you will not talk him down. The whole conversation that she had, that's playing out. So I think that speaks to Cyril's sort of diligence, to his mom conceding to a degree, and to Dedra putting her foot down. So there's lots of little things going on there. Cyril knows he's being watched. We see the reflection of a guy kind of behind him looking in the door. And as the episode plays forward, that develops, doesn't it? We see more and more of that sort of moving on as the issues of people watching, people spying on each other. The complexity you just described it with the spycraft, it's kind of right baked into this episode.
It's that whole thing of like, we see Cyril and he's been moved out into Ghorman. Fairly apparent early on that was an intentional move. Even with that conversation that he's having with his mum, you can really tell that he knows he's being listened to. This is all start of a plan, isn't it? Let's say the right things and use all the buzzwords that we need to say to get the Ghorman front to pique their interest. Somebody like that, kind of a fairly low-level, bureaucratic middle manager guy. Really is what he is, isn't he? It's perfect because they're the kind of ones that you can kind of turn quite easily. I mean, you talk about I talk about contrast. The contrast between the brutalist Coruscant, the Coruscant that we see with Bix and Andor. It feels quite grubby. You look at Chandrila last week and even Ghorman this week. Yeah. Everything's circular. Everything's more rounded and soft. And like the pillars in the hotels, they blend into the ceiling and then they become chairs and stuff. So there's a design philosophy there, which is a lot more softer. And so therefore, when you jump back to like either Cassian or even jump back to like the Imperials and that, there's this really harsh, stark contrast that really helps to separate the two environments.
Hey man, it's me, Kevin Smith, a Star Wars fan, Fantha Tracks fan.
You see Bix and Cassian go out and do some shopping. They go to like I think they call it a bodega, like a small shop. And Cassian's really on edge. And Bix is like, come on, let's just go shopping. I want to go to the nice shop. They've got nice melons and nice fruit and nice food in there. And I love that little sequence. That felt very real world. And one of the things I'm loving about Andor, above most of the shows actually, is it does feel like you could step through the screen and kind of live there.
I don't think we've been into like a corner shop. One of I think the main themes of this 3-part episode is how much Cassian is one, protecting Bix, but two, is really scared and fearful for losing her, be it to her PTSD or because like they get separated or if it gets killed. And there's that kind of callback when you think about it, like that conversation where she kind of says that he didn't have to kill that Imperial officer on that mission, but he saw your face. And now if you go back to the first episode of the season and you've got Naya speaking to Cassian and she's like, I've been told not to look at you. And he's like, no, it's fine, you can do it. He's all right to put himself at risk, potentially. Clearly shows how important she is to him. But at the same time, it also means that maybe he could make mistakes in the other way. We don't know, obviously, the context of that mission. We don't know what they were doing, who that Imperial soldier or officer was, as it were. So he may have been low level. He might have been quite higher up. Therefore, that might have ramifications. The fact of the matter is that she's starting to conflate her PTSD with actual things that are happening at the moment. And it's really cool when you get these dream sequences which have these nice cuts back into the real world where like suddenly it's actually Cassian's arm grabbing the blaster and stuff, pulls her out of it. And so like her character is just fascinating, leaning on substances and stuff, which again is a very, very kind of realistic kind of notion to happen, which makes it kind of even more, I think, relatable to a lot more people.
Also, you can see because Cassian's lost his mom and then he's lost his best friend. And so he's losing stuff all along. And you can see him becoming the loner, that he very much is a loner by Rogue One. And yet when he starts off, there's that loner element. But you realise it's kind of from his Canary upbringing, that he had a sister and he lost his sister and he's looking for her. So there's that found family thing that he needs, but his mom's brought him up as her own. You see how he lost his dad. Now he's lost Brasso. So you can see the honing down of that. So the one person he's going to want to cling onto and protect above all others is Bix. And he does get quite agitated as this chapter moves on. We go back to Cyril. Where do you think Cyril sits in this at the moment? Because there's definitely an element of sympathy, but we've seen his deductive brain in season 1. We saw what he did on Mulana. So we kind of know how he thinks.
I think he's loving it. And I think you kind of see that, like, he's playing up the outrage because he's got to keep the cover. So for him, like, the day job is not as important as the everyman kind of spy kind of like aspect. It's this whole kind of notion that, and at the moment it's hard to know how much he knows and how much he's doing because it's trying to further his own career, i.e. is he hoping that actually maybe the ISB will kind of offer him like a position or a job or something afterwards? Or is he doing it because actually, he's got feelings for Dedra, if those two really have feelings, But it's that thing that Cyril is basically being misled by Dedra, but yet on another level, both Partagaz and Dedra are being misled by Krennic because they don't know what a full end game is.
The whole unlimited power thing, and
exactly. So it's kind of like, it's kind of like, it's that thing like everybody's basically been slightly lied to and being kind of told an untruth just to kind of get them to do what needs to be done. And we kind of see it across the 3 episodes. The Ghorman front, there's a few people out in that kind of courtyard to begin with protesting, but then by the 3rd episode, there's a lot more and that. But I think for a lot of it, Cyril's kind of living his best life. And when you think about it, him and Dedra at the moment, they're the two on top. Like Cassian and Bix in the previous episode were doing missions and being fearful for the Empire. These guys, Cyril's been promoted. She's
at the top table now, isn't
she? At the top table, exactly. She's been listened to. She's got Partagaz's ear and Krennic wants her opinion and stuff. So she's moving forward. Again, it's that contrast. Like, actually, the Imperials are on top. The Freedom Fighters are the one who are kind of really struggling. Yeah. And then you kind of got this middle group of like the Ghorman front who just don't have a clue.
No.
Thinking about it, they just don't have a clue as to what they're doing. And I think it's very apt that they kind of use the French Revolution and that early kind of 30s, 40s design kind of like influence, because there's a kind of romantic notion as to what they're doing.
It's very on the nose with the French Revolution thing, isn't it? There's no doubt. In the way that the Twi'leks were always kind of like the French back in the Clone Wars days, this is completely... And I was fascinated to learn that the language they speak, I didn't know whether that was a European language or what. It's completely made up. Which I thought was brilliant that the actors learnt it phonetically. But because they've cast actors from that part of Europe, that northern part of Europe, they have that kind of accent anyway.
Exactly.
So it works brilliantly. That was wonderful.
I think there's two different types of Ghorman language. There's kind of like high Ghorman and like lower Ghorman, and that's also reflected in the text as well. So anybody who's kind of trying to kind of sit down and work out all the Aurebesh, maybe suddenly get the scroll that out of the back of a spider's arse, man, you're like, what the hell did that say? That's kind of how we kind of get Cassian onto the planet, because it's like Luthen's kind of like, well, I didn't really kind of think there was much to think about it, but actually we're hearing a lot more chatter. Kind of need to get a better understanding, like, A, who are these guys? And B, are they worth using and keeping? Or, just kind of like let them get on and just cause their own mayhem.
You've got Cyril going to the town hall and seeing how it's working and kind of actually knowing a little bit more of their language and customs than he lets on. But there's just enough of a respect that they realise, but also a naivety. They're new to this. They're a passive society. We know the Ministry of Enlightenment has been really playing up aren't the Gorm arrogant? Aren't they sniffy? Aren't they uppity? Aren't they?
But that's exactly what gets fed back to those loose women on the Holonet. Cyril's mum's watching. The Ministry of Enlightenment's obviously, they're pouring their influence onto the Holonet news and let's call it social influencers and stuff like that. I mean, and it's no different to what happens here. You watch Fox and you watch MSNBC and all the others, Matt, and you get completely different sides of a story in that. And so if you only kind of listen to the Imperial News Network, INN or something like that, then you're only going to get, these Gorse people really, they kind of keep themselves to themselves. They're not that great. And a bit like the French did back in the 30s and 40s, they only had luxury goods. They were only really, their main export was perfume and fabrics and high fashion. Now that's no different to Ghorman. And, they start talking about like cutting off tariffs and trades and stuff like that, again, to kind of really put pressure on population.
It's interesting. There's a mention here in this episode of the Ghorman massacre, but it's the Tarkin massacre. So what we've known of since West End Games days was we called the Ghorman massacre. Now they kind of refer to that event as the Tarkin massacre. And that does get explained a little bit further later on in this chapter. He meets Cassian. Luthen and Cassian have this meeting. It's kind of determined by Luthen that you need to go to Ghorman. Obviously, there's the situation with Bix, and it's worrying that she's starting to turn to these drugs. You see the vial, you see the blue liquid. Part of you thinks that looks like the poison from Temple of Doom at the very beginning. But me, I just look at that and think coaxium. I think of Spice being on Kessel. It's kind of that vibe is where it's playing for me. So she's kind of getting into a bit of glitterstim or real or something like that. There's something in there that she's getting hooked on. It's a worry because obviously the whole Dr. Gorse thing is playing with her head. But we get to see somewhere that followers and lovers of the sequel trilogy will be very familiar with, because we land on Dakar, which is where the Resistance base is in Force Awakens and the very beginning of Last Jedi. But at this point in time, it's where Saw Gerrera's partisan rebels are hooked up. So I thought that was a brilliant choice of location.
I thought it was a stroke of genius, really. From a practical standpoint, Greenham Commons not too far away from Pinewood. That's quite helpful further production. It's a nice touchstone between the two, because kind of get that feeling that the next time anybody really kind of sets foot on Dakar is probably when the Resistance kind of land there. Maybe kind of Leia goes, I remember Saw Gerrera mentioned this place.
Because Dakar makes sense, and now we've seen it, it totally makes sense because of the kind of place it is.
My name is Dean Charles Chapman, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
So the next episode in this second chapter was I Have Friends Everywhere. Interesting episode. Another one that really sort of delves into the characters, as you said. That feels very much like the focus of these three. We're getting to learn a lot more about the people that are putting everything at stake, but also not just from the rebel side, also from the Imperial side. We opened with a load of radio chatter. We're with Clea. She's at the board at Luthen's shop. I love that design of that desk. If I could have one prop from Luthen's shop, I would have that desk proudly displayed. I think it's fantastic. We learn that Davos Golden has bought something that was a forgery. The whole party thing is going on, and he wants everything checked, everything verified. And it's a problem because we learn that Luthen and Clea have put a listening device into a particular artifact at Davos Place. And somehow, if they don't want the whole deck of cards to come tumbling down, they've got to get it out. Now, that becomes a real big deal in the third episode of this block. But at this point, it's just another Jenga piece being pulled out, isn't it? It's just another bit of pressure being put on. That tension is very much a prevalent thing in this show. When people are saying it's boring and dull and there's not enough happening, wow, there's so much happening. They're just turning the screws up week by week.
What became apparent in that is that up until the last episode, it felt very much like Luthen had it all under control. But either because he's now got too many plates in motion, everything's starting to unravel a little bit. And again, there's this kind of like duality between him saying that and also then the ISB guy saying we're basically arresting too many people.
Yeah, Lonnie says it, doesn't he?
Yeah,
we're arresting too many people,
we don't have enough time to process them and interrogate them. I was trying to work out what else is going on in the galaxy at that time. Luthen's Axis, but also remember there's a fulcrum.
This is happening at the same time as Rebels.
Exactly. So like how much is, because Ahsoka's kind of been pulled into Rebels, is maybe meaning that she's not able to do quite so much of her fulcrum-y type stuff.
Right, you think more's falling on Luthen's shoulders?
I think so. I think that's not me kind of suggesting that we're going to ever get Ahsoka or even maybe even a mention of Ahsoka in this series as such. It's just one of those bigger picture things. They've done this really clever thing of like they're really focused in on a small group of people in this much bigger story, but it explains everything perfectly. But I suppose we just got to be kind of slightly aware of also what's going on in other parts of the galaxy. So yeah, you start to think, oh, actually, is this another point where like the wheels start to maybe come off? And, when somebody takes on too much and they're like, oh, we can handle it. But then actually the one thing that they're not keeping an eye on is the one thing that slips and causes like a lot of grief.
And it's the most, like you say, it's the most rattled we've seen Luthen so far by a long way. We've seen him irritated. We've seen him irritated. We've seen him a bit angry. We've seen him passionate, but we've never seen him rattled, and it's Clea that's keeping the lid on it.
She seems to be the one who's really stepping into the limelight. Yeah, in season 1, there's kind of this arrogance with Luthen. He kind of seems to be quite arrogant, even when he's not in his antique dealer guise. He knew exactly what the Empire was doing about, but I think because of the fact he's not aware of what is happening, i.e. the Death Star, there's something intangible going on that he isn't able to quite put his finger on.
That's a bit like Dedra's spent 2 years chasing Axis and got nowhere. You mentioned in the last episode that the whole thing that Partagaz says, arrest them, then make them famous. Luthen is at this point where he knows something big is coming, other than a massive conflict, which feels inevitable wherever it might be or however it might happen. But there's something else. And this big something else we know is the Death Star. That was the beauty of the very last shot of season 1. All that work on Narkina 5 was just the focusing panels on one little part of one bit of the Death Star, And now in season 2, the whole unlimited power thing being a cover for other stuff. But it's very interesting. I mean, in this one, we're back on Ghorman. Cyril calls his mom. There's that whole conversation he has with her about how irritated she is that he's not back at home and why would you take this job? The ISB inspection, which irritates Cyril no end. But on Ghorman, the Ghorm front, realise he was on Morlana 1. He's a smart guy. They're just trying to look for a way that they can use him. He's kind of receptive to it, but now we know, obviously, he's having conversations with Dedra and there's other things happening at the same time. So it's all these little concoctions coming together. At this point, you're not quite sure which way it's going to filter out, though. No,
but you're starting to kind of see how two are playing. It's quite clear and obvious how Cyril's working and stuff. If they need the rebels to do the wrong thing at the right time, this is the start of that. He gives them all those schematics and all those schedules and stuff. And he had a really cool shot of Data burst just kind of like reflected in his eye, which I thought was just a really nice shot. But then you kind of put in those juicy words about like, you restricted for like military clearance. And then actually everybody's like, well, hang on a sec. We forget that they've got this massive armory, this massive building being built.
In Palmo, yes. Casting the shadow over the memorial, which was the thing they promised they'd never do.
Exactly. And everyone's like, well, why are they doing that? Because ultimately, this is what the Ghorman front need. They need a justification to be able to present to the rest of the population what's going on. And then again, so what do they then plan to achieve? I think they're thinking that, if we call them out, then they'll just go, oh, yes, you found out and we're going to go away.
It's like Marva said, isn't it? They're here now, they're not going away anymore. On Coruscant, Bix has a visit from Luthen. On the face of it, it's a concerned friend checking in, but we know Luthen well enough to know that he's checking that Bix is not a security risk. He finds that little vial of blue stuff, which, as he says, it will cure you in the short term, but when you stop taking it, the dreams will come back even worse. That tells you a little bit about him as well, I think, that he's had experience with trauma and terrible things happening and things that he's not been able to quite get his head around and things in his past that he's had to deal with as well. I thought that was fascinating. And we go back to Dakar. We learned Willman is now joined up with the partisan rebels of Saw Gerrera. He's there to show them how to use a machine. And I'm not quite fully up to speed on what that machine does, but it involves Rhydonium, and we know Rhydonium is problematic at best.
If I'm right, Rhydonium is like a really potent fuel source.
Yeah, a bit like coaxium or something like that.
Yeah. So like Saw's right, well, basically we're going to go and nick a load from an Imperial pump or whatever it is. It's kind of like cracking a safe, but it's like if you don't put the right values in for the right pump, it's basically just going to blow up in your face. I think that's basically what it is. And Williams learned from his dad. That's the implication you kind of get from like his cagey kind of like answer to where he learned all that. So many combinations. So basically he was only sent there by Luthen to train one of Saw's guys to do it.
One guy, one route, one path, and Saw's like, I want you to learn all 9 or 8 or 9 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Which clearly is like learning the combination to 8 safes and being told in the moment, open lock 6. Not that easy.
So you can understand why that guy's like, well, hang on a sec, can I have a bit more of a clue? But then we find out why he's really so insistent on that later on. I think, if anything, this story arc really just shows you just how utterly batshit crazy Saw Gerrera is. Completely off his rocker.
He's huffing this stuff, isn't he? He's, you know, you realise what has Saw Gerrera been snorting on.
Is this part of that kind of explanation of, because he basically says like, you know, it'll kind of burn you from the inside. So is he kind of saying that, okay, yeah, it gets you high, but like you pay a price? We see him in Rogue One. Is he using that because he's having to use that to help him breathe because he's fried all his inside? Or is that basically because he's so addicted he just needs to literally just huff a bit every now and again? And
it made me wonder as well that every time we see Saw, there's a little bit less of him.
Yeah.
To the point where in Rogue One, before he dies, there's quite a bit of him has become mechanical. Part of you thinks that must be in battle. And now I'm thinking, he's probably been doing this stuff so much, his arms probably rotted off, or his legs probably rotted off. It's like a drug addiction thing, which is a really interesting wrinkle because he's very aware that he's not a normal thinking guy, let's put it in those terms. And in certain circumstances, probably thinking outside the box and being a bit dispassionate helps them and their cause. There's probably a lot of sacrifice and a lot of people being sacrificed in that particular unit of the rebellion. But it's just another great little layer to Saw's character.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
When Cassian lands on Ghorman, apart from the fact he looks like Bono from U2, there's a great little sequence where he checks in at the hotel, which overlooks the plaza, and has a conversation essentially with the bellboy. Yeah. And that's where we really do get the full SP on what the Tarkin massacre was, what we used to call the Ghorman massacre. The fact that he crushed about 500 people in that very courtyard by landing his ship.
Yeah.
And they just didn't believe that he would do it, and he did it, which just adds another element of horror to the character of Tarkin, somebody who you see and is so refined and so considered and so everything you kind of know about the Cushing, Stephen Stanton, Guy Henry performances of Tarkin. This adds a level of
real
hammer
darkness.
horror to it. Real darkness. I thought that was a wonderful scene. And again, it's Cassian doing the Luthen thing of pretending to be somebody else, talking in code. I thought that was marvellous because, as you said earlier, loads of the characters in this show are doing that.
You think about it, the Cassian sits down in that cafe and it's like, get your people to stop following me. Yeah, and the flip side is Cyril goes back home and Dedra's like, oh yeah, I had like people follow you just to make sure that you're safe, so to speak. Yeah. But like Cyril's completely not aware of what's going on, whereas Cassian is so on it. You know, he knows exactly how to do it, how to have a conversation, how to talk, got to give somebody a hug or something, and you kind of whisper in their ear and stuff. He's a lot more keyed up to have these conversations. And I mean, it's like in the James Bond books, like basically when James is out on a mission and he has to report home, and it's a conversation with the director of Universal Exports, and it's basically him as if he's a sales rep. Like when he's gone into the store and to buy the fabric, and it's that whole double talk and double meaning. Very cleverly done, very nicely done anyway. So when
Cassian has the meeting and Ryland's the elder statesman of the Gorm is meeting with him, you know that they as a society are very reserved, and to get to this point where they are ready and willing to do what they're planning to do, given that there's nowhere for them to go, they're completely under the microscope, it's almost a suicide mission if they do what they're planning on doing. He basically says, not much of a revolutionary, are you? And there's a moment where Cassian's really kind of taking that in at the bar. I thought that was a fascinating exchange. Step across to the ISB headquarters back in Coruscant, and you've got Cyril, Dedra, and Partagaz having their conversation. And again, it's the sense that Cyril, who's such an eager Boy Scout who wants to figure out these crimes and these misdeeds and wrongdoings. You saw it in the first episode, you saw him in the last chapter, where he's talking to that guy who's just been offered a desk. Oh, I caught 40 people doing some illegal smuggling, and there's things going on here you don't know. He's looking for X-Files everywhere. And Partagaz as like the master operator, and Dedra as his underling who just has to go along with it, are just letting him get more and more excited, even to the point where, this is wrong to say, this is the best day of my life, because he's just been given a pat on the head by the head of the ISB. It's just another fantastic scene. And the two happening back to back really sort of stood the two things up for me.
I like Cyril's naive passion about it. It starts to kind of almost make him a slightly sympathetic character, because you're just like, oh, dude, this is so going to go wrong. Not necessarily in the next couple of episodes, but you can kind of see the trajectory for the rest of the season, I think. And it's just like, dude, you really don't know what you're getting yourself into. And it's like, Dedra is the one that I'm struggling to work out. A bit like with CIs, criminal informants, detectives who commission them and stuff, they get quite close to them and therefore they lose their objectivity. I could see something like that happening. But I think also, and you've kind of got Partagaz who's, this is just like day-to-day stuff. And you wonder like what he says to his peers about these two. Got this like lieutenant who's basically got this like numpty hook, line and sinker.
But one thing I've noticed this season as well, more than the others, was in the previous seasons, everyone was petrified of Partagaz. He dominated that room. And he still has moments in this where he's proper chewing everyone out. But now he's listening more to Lonnie. He's listening more to Hart. There's the other senior ISB guy that he gets a lot more ear. And Dedra, of course. So now, because dialing up what you just said about Luthen can't cope, and it's one of the scenes that's literally coming up in the episode where he's saying to Claire, I can't cope, there's too much to deal with. And he's drowning in it a little bit, and she's the cool head. And you've had it previously with the ISB, with Lonnie saying, we're arresting too many people. It's too many people to process. There's all these things where everyone's kind of drowning in the bureaucracy of running everything. We see Ghorman, we see the rain, we see the transports, we know what's going to happen. And also Luthen's shop, where he's having this sequence with Claire where he's just frustrated, but also annoyed that they've got to go to this party and they've got to figure out getting this bug from out of the table, which is just an absolute bitch of a thing that they're going to have to do, because it's an obstacle that's kind of appeared out of nowhere that they do not want to deal with.
It's at that point that you really start to see the stress lines between those two start to really emerge, because like Luthen's, I knew we shouldn't have put it in there, and she's like, well,
you told me to.
Exactly. Yeah. It almost has that whole vibe of like almost like an Ocean's 11 heisty type vibe, especially when you've got all those people in that room and she's trying to prize that out in the next episode. So.
Yeah. We wrap up back on Dakar, Willman and Saw Gerrera. At this point now, Willman is the man. He's the one that's left. The other guy that was being trained up turned out to be an Imperial spy that Saw actually quite cutely drew out. There's mention of Andor, which I thought was brilliant, because a lot of people will forget that Saw Gerrera was a character in the Clone Wars with his sister who passed away. So there's mention of that, but also the moment where Willman almost just kind of goes with it, with what Saw is saying when he's talking about the Rhydonium and the addictive nature of you feel it before you smell it and all that stuff. And he literally takes his mask off after he's done the machinery part of his job and takes in a breath, which leaves you wondering, one, Saw is he's the guy that'll dive into a brand new Jaguar and sniff the leather seats. That's him. But Willman, this is all new to him. So for me, I thought that was a really powerful episode, because Willman is a young man. You see him on me in a row with his girlfriend and looking for a father figure. Has he found one in Saw Gerrera? I don't know if that's what Saw wants. We know that at this point of time, Jin has probably already left.
They would have parted Saw. Because
they would have parted ways. So there's a gap in his life for a character like Willman to come into it. So I just thought that was a really interesting moment.
I mean, I was thinking potentially there's a risk with Willman that obviously becomes dependent on the stuff, a bit like Saw, and therefore maybe he just hangs around with his dealer a little bit more, i.e. Saw. Doesn't go back to Luthen, maybe he stays with Saw. Saw was quite happy to blast him because he had seen too much. Maybe Willman's like, maybe I'll just hang around, because if I try and leave, it's probably going to cause more hassle than it's worth.
Hello, my name is Aidan Cook, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
So the third and final part of the second chapter of Season 2 of Andor, A Star Wars Story was called What a Festive Evening. We kick off on Port Steergard. We keep hearing about Steergard all the time. It got mentioned in a prior episode in Season 2. It got mentioned a lot in Season 1. It's on the Rim of Trade route as well. We see Cassian there with Luthen. Luthen wants an update. Cassian's not in the best mood.
No.
Things are moving forward pretty quickly. It just feels very fractious, doesn't it? This trio of episodes where everyone's kind of on edge. Nobody's really chilled out. I think it's a lovely balance when you think of how they were all on Mina Rao, which felt very rural and very laid back and very sociable and a community. And now
they're living safe.
Very. And now
safe,
they're living in a concrete box of a room on Coruscant that's been a safe house forever for Luthen and his people. And it's just very enclosed.
Yeah, but also, they're living in the heart of enemy territory. I would imagine that put anybody on edge. Luthen sent Cassian out to give his kind of like appraisal of the Ghorman front. And he's like, look, these guys aren't ready. They will get themselves killed, sooner rather than later.
It's interesting that, isn't it, that Cassian's the one that makes the appraisal to say they ain't ready, they're not up to this. He's making the hard call that you would imagine Luthen would normally make. He's saying if they're going to burn themselves out and do this, then let them do that, because we're not up to supporting them to the degree they need the support. And it just feeds into the whole mass manipulation of the scenario, doesn't it? That what the Ministry of Enlightenment are doing, what Partagaz is doing, what kind of Krennic is orchestrating, what Dedra's involved with, and puppeteering Cyril. Everyone's working towards something. And at this point, by episode 6 of season 2, we don't quite know what that is, but it's coming.
But then on the flip side, you've got Mon Mothma, who's going around trying to kind of like rally support for Ghorman. And, so you have that lovely kind of montage where she's going and speaking to all the different senators.
Yeah.
Because actually, like, Mon hasn't really been in this arc much. You only get that one scene in the previous episode, really just to set up the third episode, really.
And don't you think it's interesting that moment you just mentioned was in the previous episode where she's trying to rally support? And it's the Ghorman senator who himself doesn't want to put himself out there and support the work she's doing to help Ghorman, because he doesn't want to be seen to be going against the Emperor. And so there's lots of little moments in this. You hear Edie say it, I'm paraphrasing, oh, if only the Emperor knew the terrible things that are being done in his name. They think that Chancellor Palpatine... I went to see Revenge of the Sith earlier this week, back on this big screen. It was wonderful. I know you did a couple of times, and it was so cool to see it again. And all the political stuff, the way that it all shakes down, the moment when he's in the Senate and says, the Jedi attacked me and I'm now terribly deformed. And we look at it with a raised eyebrow going, really? But then the populace have seen this. And as somebody said, and I think it might have been Tony Gilroy in an interview, basically said, a fractional, tiny amount of people in the galaxy would even know there was a Jedi Order or there were Sith. It's not a galactically known thing. It's a fractional amount of people. Everybody else is just living their lives, which is, I think, why I'm so attached and hooked into Andor, because Ferrix was the same, Mina Rao was the same, all these other worlds, Ghorman is the same. They're focusing on getting the spiders to make the silk, all the stuff they do. That's why Vader's arrival at the end of Rogue One is so impactful, I think. It's so incongruous to everything else we've seen, the nitty-gritty real worldness of it, and then in comes Godzilla with a lightsaber, basically, and does what he does. Which, because, of course, we've got to lead into A New Hope, so it has to happen. And that was a masterstroke decision to put him in the end of that film. But I just think the way that it's all building is so considered and so clever in every way.
Yeah, I think that kind of comes down to Bo Williamson's writing. It's very well thought out and paced out as well.
Bodes well for Dawn of the Jedi as well, doesn't it?
Doesn't it just? That'll be interesting, because I've noticed there's been a few, and there's like a couple of mentions in this episode about like Rakata and the Lost Empire, and you're just like,
That's a bit like High Republic stuff being mentioned before we even knew about the High Republic, isn't it?
Exactly.
Cassian and Bix, we know they're together. There's a very tender moment in this when they come together. There's the whole kiss. It's like, there's no doubt now that it's not just convenience, it's a proper relationship.
Yeah.
Really interesting when you stack that up against Dedra and Cyril, where the sexiest line in all of Star Wars is actually said by Dedra twice, turn out the lights, which I thought was wonderfully, wonderfully down in the basement in Pulp Fiction. I thought that was brilliant.
Well, exactly. But that's the whole thing. It's like you look at Cassian and Bix. They've come from a very supportive, loving and attentive background, whereas Cyril didn't get any affection from his mother, just probably rebukes, and she still rebukes him breakfast time now. And then Dedra, who's
raised in a kinder block.
Yeah. I mean, if it was a Kinder Egg, that might have been quite fun. But
they're illegal. You can choke on Kinder Eggs.
However,
it's like the Force.
So, like, if you've got two people who've never known affection,
How do they navigate a relationship?
Exactly. How do they? You get those awkward moments, like the kiss on the cheek when he kind of comes through the door, and like you've only got an hour, and it's like, okay, well, let's get on with it. As it happened in that meeting with Partagas, oh, this is the greatest day of my life, and you kind of like can't quite figure out, is she trying to smile nicely at him, or is she smirking because like you're an idiot or something?
I think she knows the power in Cyril's world of a little bit of positive reinforcement.
Exactly.
If you overdid it, he'd be like, I don't know, I can't handle that. But just enough, just a breadcrumb is enough, isn't it?
Cyril and Dedra, or Clive and Deborah.
Cyril and Deirdre is what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
That's where my head's going.
It's got sitcom written all over it.
70s sitcom. Totally. They run a boarding house together. There's no doubt about it. Luthen's shop. Cassian goes to Luthen. He's pissed off that he spoke to Bix. Cassian at this point thinks the biggest problem in his world at the moment is Luthen, not the Ghorman issue. Luthen is a problem. And Luthen's basically saying Bix could be a problem, and at some point she's going to have to be dealt with, and it's just how it's dealt with. And Cassian's like, no, I'm not. That's not for me. You make that determination. So there's a bit of a master and apprentice vibe going on here.
Yeah.
Cassian's kind of outgrowing him in the same way it feels that Clea is, to a degree, sort of outgrowing Luthen as well. So it feels like the ground's a little bit rocky under Luthen's feet at the moment. Partagaz as well, back at ISB headquarters, explains to two of his underlings that the whole Dr. Gorst program has now stepped away from just being an ISB thing, and military intelligence have now got involved. He's annoyed. There's definitely that CIA, FBI friction going on there. So he wants them to keep an eye on that, because it's still a resource he needs, but now the Emperor's decided that work can be expanded. Got to wonder, was there an element of that work that ended up in the torture droid in A New Hope that Leia had to deal with?
100%.
Feels like it, doesn't it?
Very much so. But Partagas delivering probably the best quote of this episode: calibrate your enthusiasm.
Yes, that's got to go on a T-shirt. That's got to go on a T-shirt.
Yeah, we should get that printed and not tell Lucasfilm or Disney.
It's fine. They don't listen anyway. They don't read Fantha Tracks. Good grief. We'd be finished if they read us or listened, even worse. Yeah. Cinta and Vel. We know that Vel saw Cinta in the previous chapter as Tay was being taken away to his as yet undetermined fate. And so they're aware of each other. They're in a world where they're sent off on missions. We see Cassian go all the time. You've got to assume that Luthen's having conversations with Vel, and especially with Cinta. She's more boots on the ground at this point. They do get to come back together and sort of rekindle. There's the relationship side of these characters. Feels very much at the fore in this episode with Cassian and Bix and Cinta and Vel. Dedra and Cyril. There's a lot of that going on, but the plan is developing now on Ghorman. The plan to figure out what's in these shipments that are coming in, that the armory is what we think it is, and we need to prove it. It's not the shipments that are coming in that are listed that are the problem. It's the shipments that are coming in that aren't listed are the ones that need the attention.
Those are the ones, nobody knows about. What shipment? There wasn't a shipment. And so therefore you look at the ones that are on the list, you can pull one of those open those up, and you've just got 20 tons of melons or something. They've been brought in basically to do the mission and kind of show the Ghorman front kind of how to run it. And Cassian kind of brings up a good point. It's like, where are you going to run to? Because you're local. You're going to do it, and then you're going to go back to your houses. Yeah, exactly. Then what are you going to do? You haven't thought this through, Matt. And at least with Cinta and Vel, they're kind of able to coalesce them together and war plan it out and game it out and stuff. And then you start to really realise that actually, these guys are quite proud of their own little kind of rebellion. And suddenly to have outsiders kind of come in and kind of start bossing them around creates a bit of friction there.
As the episode moves on, you start to see the gears turning because, as you say, Cinta and Vel are sort of leading this attack on this convoy to try and get what they get. And that moves forward and happens. You've got Cyril watching it from a distance. You've got an ops room with Partagaz and Dedra watching it. They clear the room so they can have control of the room. That's a fascinating little moment as well. And so all these things are happening. And in the background, you've got the party. You've got Bail Organa's at the party, where we finally, for the first time, see Benjamin Bratt as our new actor behind Bail Organa, who did a smashing job, I've got to say. And Mon and Perrin are there, and all the other things that are happening. And then Krennic turns up, which is, the tiger walking into the room in a hangover, isn't it? So there's all these different things happening at the one time. And whilst this chapter of 3 doesn't have it doesn't have an old Arnie heist moment, it doesn't have a Rick's Road moment, but it has this moment. And because there's so many things happening at the same time, the tension, I think, is the drama. The tension is the big action, isn't it?
Who's going to be found out? Who's going to be caught?
Claire almost blows it for Lonnie. You're going to get caught. I'm going to move to your left. And she's doing that slow turn, the hands bleeding as she's trying to get the mic out. Obviously, the attack on the convoy itself goes south because the Ghorman are not used to this, and they start to bicker and they start to get annoyed, and they get their hands on a weapon, which is not what Vel wanted. And as a consequence, just as we lost Brasso at the end of the last chapter, in this one, we lose Cinta.
To basically what it is, in essence, friendly fire, which is like the worst way to go because it's like normally avoidable. He just produces a blaster. He was told, I don't want anybody except for me and Sintra carrying a blaster.
Yeah.
And he's got a blaster. And then you've got that other
one
kind
shot.
So,
and of course, Cyril hears that, and that's when he calls in for backup. So the Empire starts turning
which is which he was there to do anyway. They needed him to elevate the Ghorman front stand in his status, but they don't want it to look like, it was too easy. So you just want to be able to kind of let them escape, but only just pull them in once they're just about ready to go, and then it will kind of sound believable because, the Imperials weren't expecting anything, so they're not very battle ready. That whole scene with Mon sparring with Krennic is just fantastic, and it's like how much implication is Krennic pouring into what Mon's saying and stuff, and he's got her pretty much on the back foot, and it's really pressing, and which I thought was a fantastic scene.
Don't you think though, with Krennic, because he's being clearly used sparingly throughout the season, and I've no doubt if they'd said to Ben Mendelsohn, man, you're going to be as front and centre as Cassian, he'd have been all over it because it's clearly a character he enjoys. And we saw him walk on stage at Celebration in 2016 in full character. We just had a little junket with him, which you can see on Fantha Tracks TV right now. He's fully in. But I think, like many things, if you use it, just dash it in here. When he walks in that room, it's like, oh, wow, Krennic. And in this realm, I think having Krennic involved is more powerful than if Vader walked in or the Emperor walked in or Tarkin walked in, because they're too far up the ladder. They're just too iconic almost to work in the realms of what is happening in this story. But Krennic, he's the villain of this particular portion of history, isn't he?
Precisely. He's behind the whole Ghorman plan.
Yeah, so to get the Calcite.
So therefore, he is most important. And I think, as you said, you need to get the Emperor Vader in, and I don't necessarily see Mon Mothma shying away too much from either of them, but she's not going to go toe-to-toe with Vader in that kind of war of words. Sparring like that doesn't happen with Vader. I hope it doesn't change for the rest of the season. We don't see the Emperor. You see the Emperor at the right time in Empire Strikes Back and then properly in Return of Jedi. I don't think we need to see him at all, really.
That's a really good point, in that Lucas had Palpatine and the Emperor as a character when A New Hope was being filmed, but you never see him. There's no need to see him in A New Hope. He's back on Coruscant. We ain't gone to Coruscant yet, so that makes all the sense. So I very much agree. We end the episode with one of the biggest loose ends in Bix's life very definitively being tied up. She breaks into the Imperial headquarters. She captures Dr. Gorst. She puts on the machinery that he put onto her and basically does the worst thing or the best thing, dolls it up to 11 and leaves him to it. She doesn't even take the little snack box he brought in with him, so I thought was a lovely touch. And then as she walks out, takes out the guard, and then Cassian joins her, and they blow the living crap out of the building, hopefully taking most of the research with it. I thought that was a great way to end this little block of episodes. It was a win. They get a win.
It's a win. And also, this whole arc is bookended by Bix and Gorst. He's like the first person you basically see. And so, that is overshadowing this whole arc. And so, at least for the next arc, Bix can move on. Clearly, she's capable and she's fearless and that she could be a good operative. So, I hope that we get to see a bit more of that.
We'll be back next week for our next batch of episodes.
The third block of Andor Season 2. If you want to send us a listener's question or your thoughts or theories, please do. We'd love to discuss them either in next week's reaction chat or on the main Making Tracks episode. As always, Mr. Newbold is going to read out a long list of how you can get in touch and how you can listen and where you can listen and read and watch and everything else on the Fantha Tracks network.
Email radio@fanthatracks.com. Head to links.fanthatracks.com for links to our social media feeds, Fantha Tracks TV and Fantha Tracks Radio. Thanks to James Semple for the Fantha Tracks intro, Blues Harvest for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. New episodes drop Tuesdays and Fridays at 7 o'clock UK time. Our weekly news show Good Morning Tatooine goes live Sundays at 9 o'clock UK time on Facebook and YouTube. And remember, Fantha Tracks is absolutely free, so it costs nothing to stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news.
So until then, everybody, thank you very much for listening. May the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's Collecting Tracks.